bird here, which we'll be hopping on. Oh, I forgot to mention the 3 white stripes on the Chicago flag, where there are not blue stripes. Those stand for the 3 areas of Chicago, the 3 branches of the Chicago River. So on our tour today, we'll start out on the main. What a beautiful day. Saturdays are fun too, because there's probably a lot of people downtown. You'll get a lot of waves. You'll feel like you're in a parade. Eventually you get so many, you have to almost be selective about who you wave back to. So this is probably one of my favorite views we get all day.
Yeah, look at that.
Yes, so welcome, my friends, to the Chicago River, our sweet home Chicago, this living museum of architecture. Let's talk buildings, shall we? Let's jump right into it. Go ahead and get started with this lovely curvy column blue glass skyscraper ahead of us here on the left. This is the St. Regis, and she's a fairly new addition to our skyline, just completed back in 2020, designed by Studio Gang and the chief architect over there named Jeannie Gang. Really prominent on the skyline now because of its unique shape, and because this is now the 3rd tallest building in Chicago. It is also the tallest building in the world, designed by a female-led architectural team. Whoa, that's right. Jeannie Gang is super cool though. She is a Chicagoland native, a Harvard grad, and as we get closer, but while we have this view from a distance, I want you to just make note of these 3 patio setbacks or balconies that you see coming out of the building. Almost look like tears on a wedding cake or something, right? So these setbacks actually match the heights of buildings nearby.
Chicago bird.
So it might not totally look like it, but this first setback actually matches the height of that white building with the clock tower. Second setback matches the height of a building on the other side of the river, I'll point out. And then the 3rd setback matches the height of that big black box building behind it. So we'll talk more specifically about what that means, but want you to just take a little look. Almost looks like a wave of water cascading down it. And that is very, very fittingly called Aqua Tower. Also designed by Jeannie Gang and Studio Gang. And what's cool about the balconies on Aqua Tower is that they're all completely unique in size, shape, and protrusion. So each balcony is geometrically unique, and this allows residents to technically see their neighbors, so you can say hello from above or below. It also shades neighboring apartments, minimizes wind shear, and prevents birds from colliding with the tower. This is the iconic Wrigley building, commissioned in the early 1920s by the Wrigley family, behind the chewing gum fortune and the baseball stadium, Wrigley Field, home of the Chicago Cubs. And it was originally constructed to be the Wrigley Candy Company's headquarters. So at the time, kind of the only big building over here in the River North area. And the Wrigley building is designed in a style called Spanish Revivalist. And we'll talk about it. There are already existing tried and true standards of beauty into our buildings at the time. So the Wrigley building is specifically Spanish Revival because the clock tower is modeled after La Giralda Tower of Seville Cathedral in Spain, from the International Hotel and Tower. So I mentioned these 3 patio setbacks or balconies that integrate from tower into by Khalifa is about as tall as if we took 2 Trump towers, stacked them directly on top of each other, including the spire. So super tall. Trump Tower is a high-end residence and hotel. There is a top floor penthouse that just sold this past year for a crisp $20 million. If you are looking for something a little more affordable, a little more budget-friendly, over on the right here, we have the twin corn-cob-shaped towers of Marina City. And Marina City is an entire residential complex completed in the mid-1960s, designed by Bertram Goldberg. And Goldberg was a bit of a social scientist architect. He really believed that people should be living and thriving in city centers like they were in Europe where he studied. So he designed Marina City in order to get residents into the central business district of Chicago that we call the Loop because of the shape our public transit train system makes around the downtown area. And no one was really living in the Loop in the late 1950s, early 60s, so Goldberg wanted to draw them in by offering all the resources of an entire neighborhood in a single complex. So you have housing up at the top, there is parking right below it, there's an off shape up at the roof, these sort of pillared windows and these like white columns running down the length of the building. Well, this looks like a modern day Greek or Roman style temple, right? Like a contemporary Parthenon. So that there is 77 West Wacker, and although it was built in the early 1990s, it's meant to embody the style of the classics. So using modern materials to emulate classical Greek or Roman styles. And this is known as neoclassical. interest in the river water quality. So during the summer, the Riverwalk is just packed with people because we've added all these amenities to it, like dining, performances, kayaking, fishing, nice places to just like chill and take a lunch break. All in the hopes that we get people down to the river, start caring more about the water, again, so we can really clean it up. This building coming up on the left here is called the Builders Building, and it's kind of caught between two decades because the left part of the building, the majority represents the architectural style of the later 1920s when it was built, and then you'll notice a little break on the right where the rest of the building was added in the 80s. Notice how they use modern materials and styling to complement the historical part of the building so that the original part and that added annex seem to kind of exist in perfect harmony together. It's a great example of respecting our architectural heritage. Now, if our Builders Building is kind of caught in time and our revivalist and neoclassical buildings are nostalgic for the past, then the architectural movement known as Art Deco was truly a forward-thinking style for the 1920s. It pointed towards a machine-made American future. It expressed all the opulence, optimism, and financial success of the Roaring 20s. And we see a great example of it over here in the Merchandise Mart. So the Merchandise Mart features many key elements of Art Deco design. It has these vertical racing stripes that draw your eye upwards, deep inset windows that reinforce the look of those stripes, a polished Indiana limestone facade, and simple repeated geometric shapes and metallic elements that almost create a sense of rhythm when you're looking at them. And the Merchandise Mart was river, so the main branch that we've been traveling down, the north branch, which is over this way, and the south branch, which we will be heading down in a moment, all come together, all converge. Directly in front of us, you'll notice this Hot Pocket looking building, perhaps a McDonald's apple pie if you prefer. This is the Pickard Chilton designed River Point from 2017, and that arc you see at the bottom is actually structural because there are Metro and Amtrak passenger trains running underneath the building, so that structural support needed to be above ground. And then coming up on the left here ahead of us, you see this building with this V or Y-shaped base. This is 150 North Riverside, also completed in 2017, designed by Getch Partners, and also some cool structural gymnastics going on with this one. So the 2-acre site where the building now stands sat empty for a really long time. No one wanted to build on it because it was deemed too inconvenient for construction. On that building is one called inertial slosh dampers. And don't worry, you can't see it, so you're not missing anything, but all the way up at the top of the building, there are 12 giant tanks holding 160,000 gallons of water. And how it works is this: when the wind blows the building in one direction, water sloshes in the opposite direction, keeping the building standing nice and upright, essentially working like a large shock absorber. So the next series of buildings coming up on the right-hand side were built chronologically and do a really good job of showing us the evolution of architecture in the US throughout the 20th century. So detectives, let's decode the buildings to better understand what was going on when they were built. So in an ideal world, the Wrigley building would be right here at the start of the timeline, early 1920s, European revivalist style. But the first one we can see here is 2 Riverside Plaza. Built in 1929, it's another excellent example of Art Deco design. So it's jazzy, snazzy, optimistic for the Roaring 20s. Until the 20s, notice how it curves along with the curve of the river. So we're finally out of the box. We're constructing buildings with reflective glass. I like to think to teach society to get along in an ever-changing world. So friends, that's how it evolved. We started with these beautiful ornate cathedral-style buildings in the early 1920s, then this striped and snappy Art Deco in the late 20s, black boxes in the 60s, white boxes in the 70s, then these curved contextual structures from the 80s and beyond. Real quick, on our left here is a map of the Chicago River, this mural, and it's hard to see with the sun, but if you draw your eye, you can see that there's a red Lego up there. That is us where we currently are, so essentially making it a really big "are here" map. The Jokers, guys, zip line down onto the roof of the building. They go in Rock Gotham Bank. Then at the end of the scene, the Joker, played by Heath Ledger, drives a school bus full of cash out of those windows, escapes down Van Buren Street here. Well, it's not a bank. It is actually our old post office, and it was abandoned for years. Somewhat recently bought by an investor who did a complete gut rehab of it, repurposed it into offices, now home to companies like Uber, Walgreens, PepsiCo, etc. And it started not too far from where we are right now. It's just like a few blocks over to the southwest over there. So on the night of Sunday, October 8th, 1871, a small fire broke out that ended up burning down a third of Chicago. It raged for 3 days. It lasted 3 days. It left over 100,000 residents homeless, killed at least 300 people, and caused billions of dollars in property damage. So those are some of the facts that we know about the fire. But there's also another theory, legend, rumor, if you will, as to how this fire started. And this theory goes that this woman, Mrs. O'Leary, Mrs. Catherine O'Leary, had a cow in her barn, and while she was milking this cow, it kicked over a kerosene lantern to start the fire. So that is literally what the city of Chicago, the Chicago Tribune, blamed this fire on. They started this huge rumor that a cow is what caused a third of the city to burn down. Now let's think about this for a moment. This tragic hand, we were simultaneously gifted a blank slate on which to rebuild our city. Right? I mean, we had nothing else to do but completely start over from scratch. So that's exactly what we did. And we rose from the ashes faster than any metropolis in history. We quite literally ended up creating a second city because following the fire, a really specific type of person wanted to move here.
Obama.
Architects and engineers were flocking to Chicago. They wanted to seize upon a really rare opportunity to construct so many brand new buildings, what was already considered really valuable property. And these guys were smart too, because they finally realized that wood is flammable. So they started building buildings with steel frames instead, and within half a generation, we built the first skyscraper here in Chicago. The Great Chicago Fire also really led to the vertical development of our cities. So if not for the fire, kind of hard to say when or where we would have started building our cities. And right here, these kind of funky apartments might look a little familiar. These are the River City apartments from 1986, and these were also designed by our boy Bertrand Goldberg. So same social scientist architect behind the twin corncob towers of Marina City. Same kind of idea with this, built to be a city within a city, just on a much more scaled down version. Ahead of us on the right here, you can see this black boxy building that sort of looks like it has gray Legos popping out of it. This is 235 Van Buren. It's a residential building completed back in 2010, designed by Perkins and Will. Those gray Legos are balconies, and the pattern of those balconies is supposed to reflect like an aerial view of car and semi-truck traffic as the building overlooks Ida B. Wells Highway. Also in front of us, we have a little bit of an architectural fairy tale, a royal family of buildings here in Chicago that we're going to talk about. So we have a king. He's this tall, dark, handsome fella in front of us with the two white antennas. A queen. She's this peachy pink octagonally building with the beryl crown in front of it. And then we have a princess. Over on the right, you can see that statue sticking up into the sky. We'll call that our princess, and we'll start with her. So that building is the Chicago Board of Trade, built in 1930. Arguably the best example of Art Deco you can see on the river. And the statue on top is of Ceres. So she's the Roman goddess of agriculture. It's from her we get words like cereal and cerveza. She's on top of the building because this is the Midwest, and the Board of Trade is where we traded products like corn and wheat. Clocking in at a lengthy 1,451 feet tall, or 442 meters tall. When it was completed in 1974, it was the tallest building in the world, and it remained the tallest for 24 years. Was the tallest building in the U.S. up until 2014, when construction on One World Trade Center in New York City was completed, and that surpassed us. So the tallest building in the Windy City, this one too sways in the wind. So its structural design is what offsets this sway, and this is the second technique we'll talk about. So as we get a little closer, you can see better that the building is actually made up of a group of 9 columns. Each is 75 feet by 75 feet, and they're all bundled together at the base, almost like a Rubik's Cube. And they rise to various heights. So 2 columns rise to the 50th floor, 2 to the 65th, 3 to the 96th, and 2 to the 110th. And this is a concept called bundled tubes. Also what the Burj Khalifa in Dubai uses to offset set this way. So put very, very simply, the idea is that these multiple columns of varying heights are going to offer more structural support and defense against the wind than just one single column would. Going back to the name, so Sears Department Store left the building in the 90s, which was kind of a bummer. It was a big Chicagoland employer. And then the Willis Insurance Brokerage Group from England moved in, leased 3 floors, and with that came the naming rights. So the official name is Willis Tower. On maps, GPS, whatever, it'll say Willis Tower. Talk to any Chicago native, they'll probably say Sears. Maybe because we're nostalgic for the past, most likely just a little stubborn about it. So for consistency's sake, the rest of the tour I will be referring to it as the Sears Tower. Come all the way up at the top of this Sears, you'll see five glass boxes jutting out into the sky. There's an observation area up there called the sky deck, so you can step out onto those boxes. And visibility from the sky deck is about 40 to 50 miles in each direction. On a clear day, you can see 4 states from up there: Illinois, Indiana, Wisconsin, and Michigan. Real quick, want to have a chat about those white antennas on top of the Sears. So those antennas are surprisingly tall, real tall, like almost 30 stories tall, which is about as tall as these black box buildings coming up here on the left. So think about that. Each of those antennas about as tall as that building. These antennas, however, do not get to count towards the building's overall height. They're considered purely utilitarian. But counter that with the now tallest building in the United States, One World Trade Center, which has a spike on top of it called a spire. And technically, a spire is not considered an antenna at all. It's considered a decorative design choice, like as in, it would not be One World Trade Center without this spire, and therefore it does get to count towards the building Stinky Onion. So yeah, New York does get the Big Apple or the Stinky Onion. That's okay. Do have a handful of other nicknames as well. The second city I briefly mentioned, one reason being we burned down the first one. Also known as the Windy City, and it is actually super windy here. Not today for some reason, but typically really windy. However, this name actually comes from when we were campaigning to host that 1893 World's Fair. We had sent some politicians and promoters to Congress, and they could not stop bragging about what an amazing city we are. So some people got fed up, started calling us those windbag blowhards from that windbag city, Chicago. Back in the day, we were known as the hog butcher to the world because we were a huge meat packing hub. So meat packing was Chicago's, it was our thing. A lot of the buildings along the river we used as like giant warehouses to store all this meat. Some other nicknames include Chi-Town, City of Neighborhoods, City in the Garden, Paris on the Prairie, Third Coat. Traditionally, what ingredient will you never find on a Chicago-style hot dog? Ketchup. Do not put ketchup on our hot dogs. And our hot dogs come dragged through the garden, they call it, because there's a lot of stuff on them. We start with a steamed poppy seed bun and an all-wheat retail. Men such as Marshall Field, Aaron Montgomery Ward, Sears, Ford, Wanamaker, and others. Over on the right-hand side, you can see these stainless steel columns at water's edge, so at the base of those plants. And the idea is that the roots of those plants grow down underneath there, creating a mini habitat, so that native species of fish have a place to spawn. So it's a place for baby fish to hide and not get eaten. Also a place for 7th grade field trips.
We're having fun. What do you think about the tour?
It's freezing.
Hot outside.
A nice job of covering it up. Also kind of randomly, we have the headquarters from Encyclopedia Britannica. Over on the right, I want you to check out this short, stocky building kind of nestled between these two supermodel skyscrapers. 55 West Wacker over here, great example of brutalism style architecture. So it was built in the later 1960s. It uses heavy, dark industrial materials, has small dark windows. In general, brutalist architecture expresses a kind of moral seriousness. It's guised as a fortress, which is why you'll oftentimes find it used. A little closer on the right here, this ornate building with the domes is the Jewelers Building from 1926. And this was originally constructed to be a high-tech office tower for jewelers, with the lower 23 floors serviced as an automobile elevator, so not for security reasons. reasons, tenants could take themselves, their car, their jewels, straight from the ground floor up to their office without anyone swooping in and their jewels. So as we come under the bridge here, I want you to consider for a second what important role space can play in architecture. So if you check out these four buildings over here on the right, super close together, right? And then those nice 18-foot alleyways that were put into his plan. And a lot of cities build this way. A lot of East Coast cities in particular. That's why there's no space in between. But if you notice, we haven't really seen this yet on our tour today. That's the front of us, around us. That's not really how we live here in Chicago. We tend to give our buildings which building's design. It's built in a French Gothic revival style. The building's crown is modeled after a 13th century cathedral in Normandy, France. And the newspaper itself hasn't been in the building for quite some time, so currently it's being converted into high-end condos, which is kind of a bummer. Luckily, they can't touch the exteriors. They are Chinese. And the one we haven't mentioned yet is kind of nifty because we can't see it. So it's a little blinding, but if you look all the way up towards the top of the building, top of the tallest tower, you may have already noticed that there are 2 floors that are empty, right? Sort of look like they're under construction, no windows, no condos, no people. So those are the 83rd and 84th floors. They're left intentionally empty, and they're what we call blow-through floors, so that the wind can literally blow through them and relieve some of the pressure on the windward side of the building. So that was not in the original plans for the building. They constructed a wind test pretty far into construction, realized they needed it. So Jeannie May kind of refers to it as like a little happy accident, dirty and industrial. Did you guys know that we actually reversed the direction of the Chicago River?
Yes.
True. So as mentioned, for many, many years, our river was nothing more than like a toxic dumping ground for any kind of sludge Chicagoans didn't want. So where do you think all those meatpacking carcasses went? The river. Industrial runoff, the river. Raw sewage, we just put it in the river. Well, obviously this was not sustainable, as our river was flowing into Lake Michigan, which is also where we were getting our drinking water. So by the 1800s, disease was just running rampant around Chicago. 1880, we actually became known as the cholera capital of the world, which isn't great. So we hatched a plan to reverse the direction of the river. And in 1900, they completed the Sanitary and Ship Canal, which is a 28-mile-long canal that connects the south branch of the Chicago River to the Des Plaines River. And it works because this canal is much lower than the river, much lower than the lake. So it uses the force of gravity to act like a straw and suck the river backwards. So we went, cleaned up our drinking water. See you.
Boarding photos. Bakit nag-picture ba kayo?
Yahoo! Thank you, thank you.
Wow! Brad.
Where are we going? Eat again? Gutom na ba?